Good afternoon, everybody. And it's now time to convene the Committee of the Whole agenda for consideration of the 2025 budget. Just a quick couple of words before we get underway. Most of this presentation, as it has been in the past, will be done by our County Administrator, Mr. Witt, with the assistance of the Finance Director, Mr. Hawkins. We're going to, we've scheduled 2 hours for this meeting, but we have a board meeting at 5 o'clock. Now, it's not a hard and fast deadline, but in chatting with the administrator, he will take about an hour, but we're going to redo the agenda ever so slightly because there's a lot of interest in the last couple of items numerically in our county budget, items 26 through 28, dealing with UW extension and that sort, and a couple of other things. So we're going to move those to the front of the agenda so that the members of the audience that are here can hear that part of the debate first, and then we'll move back to what's scheduled. So when we call on Administrator Witt, he will be addressing the first 4 items that are in our budget books, which is a general overview of the county situation. And then we'll switch all the way to 26 through 28. Then we'll come back and continue in order from 4 through 25. So with that in mind, has everybody had a chance to sign in? We're missing 2 folks as of now, but they'll probably be here shortly. So we do have a quorum, so we'll get underway. Are there any adjustments to the minutes from the last meeting? If not, those minutes are approved, and I'll call on the administrator at this point, Mr. Witt, to review the 2025 recommended budget by the county administrator. I would also ask when it gets to the point where we're going to have questions, although our rules say address them through the chair, I would just suggest we address them directly to the administrator if that's okay with him, and he can call on people also. If I see several hands going up at once, I might try to get some order in it, that so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so in that order. But other than that, you can address the questions directly to the administrator and have the conversation directly with him. Thank you.
All right. We've already seen our first budget cut of the evening. I thought I was told an hour and a half, and now it's down to an hour. So we'll get going. So as we start looking at the budget, though, you know, the department heads, they put together a lot of requests. We sit down with the staff, the finance director and I meet with all of them, work through the budget, gather input from the standing committees, and try to come up with a balanced budget for you. So my job as the county administrator, though, is to read your mind. And so I'm going to demonstrate the skill just a little bit so you have some confidence in the budget that I presented to you. So Chair Long, if you would play along with me. So I'm going to try to read your mind. I'm going to ask you just 3 very basic questions. I'll write down what your answer is before you give it to me. So my first question is, think about one of the supervisors in this room. So get them in your mind, and I'll try to read your mind, you know, the body language, who you might have glanced at first. Okay, who did you select?
Oops. Supervisor Fiedler.
All right. All right, my second question for you then is, what's your favorite color? Or not even favorite color, just think of any color. Get that in your mind. Let me think about it here. All right, what color did you come up with?
Red.
Red, okay. Final question, just a real easy one. Think up or down. Get that in your mind. Okay, and what
Sideways?
It wasn't one of the choices.
Okay, we'll go up.
All right. Okay, so first question was, what supervisor were you thinking of? It was Supervisor Fiedler. Second question is, what color did you choose? It was red. And the third one was, what direction? It was up. There you go. So I'm able to read the chair's mind. If I can do that with the rest of you, the other 18, we should have a balanced budget that's good to go. All right, so thank you all for playing along. Normally I open with a joke. Today I opened with a magic trick, so improving my repertoire.
Point of order, point of order. I saw you write them down as he gave them.
You know, a good county administrator never reveals his tricks.
I never said I was good.
Yeah. All righty. So we're going to start with the budget presentation that's in your packets and in your budget books. It's on page 29 of the budget book or page 32 of the packet, whichever way you're following along. It'll also be on the screens in front of you and on the screens here for the audience. So we're going to go through the county administrator recommended budget. And again, it's basically the my guess of what 19 of you want. So we're going to go through the process, the schedule, the priorities that you had established for me early on, mission and vision statement of the county, the financial condition, debt service, major changes, revenues, expenses, where staffing changes are, what employee benefits are impacting the budget, what the mill rate looks like, taxpayer to the impact, and then the 2026 budget forecast. So again, the process, you know, this is a veteran group other than Supervisor Rice, so she'll catch on though quickly here. So it starts early in the year. We only get a few months off, but basically it starts in April. We have a committee of the whole, you set some priorities, and then we review it at department level, we review it at standing committee level. We get to the committee of the whole, which is today, your first chance to see the recommended balanced budget. And then a month from now, we'll go to a public hearing and ask for final approval of the budget. So the budget priorities that you had set back on June 4th was consider increasing the sales tax to close the amount of gap that I had there and use some of those revenue sources to balance the budget. Acknowledge that we were going to have a large health insurance increase, so we were projecting 5 to 10%. You would hope to keep it on the lower end. Provide compensation increase for the employees. We wanted to at least get a COLA increase in there with the goal of getting to a step increase. Cover the inflationary pressures, and then carefully consider any new position requests that we have. So those were the priorities that I took into consideration as we went through this budget. The mission and vision statement of the county, you know, just to keep this in mind, we are a service organization. And it's right in our vision, delivers service with compassion and respect to the people and the environment. So as a service organization, you're going to see really everything we do in here, a lot of the changes, they're all service related. Talking about the equalized value then, the financial condition of the county. The value of the county continues to go up. You can see that large increase as we continue to go upwards. On the net new construction, the subset chart on here, you see a drop going into 2025. So, I mean, it's still within the same 2% range, but it's on the lower end of what we've seen over the last 5 years. Population of the county continues to go up. We're just below 100,000 in population now. And we do have a relatively young population compared to the state average. When we look at debt, so I added on here the 2025 estimated general obligation bond issue. And I did that because it's part of the KIP that the county board has approved by resolution. So I'm estimating what that $7.5 million would look like blended with our current debt structure. So right now in 2025, we have 10.7 million in annual debt payments. That's our payment for the year. When we add the additional debt, you can see that it's going to go up 1 year in 2026, but then it reblends. So we're at 10.6, 10.6, 10.1, $10 million. So there's really just a 1 year increase. And Supervisor Burning, he already caught this, called me right away and pointed it out. So if you want to talk maybe Supervisor Burning about what your idea was about how we're going to get rid of that 1 year increase in 2026.
So my idea actually was kind of convoluted and you fixed it, so maybe I could hand it back to you.
Yeah.
I mean, you basically accomplished what we were looking for, which was to be able to do the highway department without having a net increase on the debt service payments that impact the taxpayer. So if you'll take away, because if I do what I did, no one will understand it.
So in 2026, we have that spike up. So what we want to do is we want to use cash fund balance, and we're only looking at probably about $600,000. but use cash fund balance to bring that back down to the same level. So you can build the entire highway department, and this proves that, without a tax increase, without increasing the annual debt payment. So there's no tax increase. So that didn't happen by accident. That happened because of years and years of planning by the county board and the structuring of the debt the way that we do, that we have it stepping down so that in any given year or any couple of years, we can add new debt if necessary, or we can provide taxpayer relief. So that's a debt structure that the county board has adopted. That's the way that we're doing it. And that's going to be the benefit that really probably for the first time that you're going to see with the highway shop, that you'll be able to do that bond issue, fixing 1 year, but having no tax increase. So that's a really good thing for the county moving forward. All right, so on to the debt service levy rate. So I kind of highlighted on here some of the expansions that we had. So you had the nursing homes. So, you know, we used to sit down here at this lower level. There's a lot of projects, though, that the county has taken on besides the $20 million for the nursing home. Then we built a $27 million highway shop. We did a jail special needs for $8 million. And then we did a government center expansion project that you're all sitting in now for the very first county board meeting. That was $80 million. So the tax rate has gone up. But as more and more people move into the county, that rate goes down because you're sharing it with more and more people. So that's what you're starting to see now with 2025, is that rate will continue to come back down. And we're going to be able to add the highway shop with no increase to this rate at all. Because of the way that we've structured all of these bonds, we'll be able to blend that new debt in there. Now, if you do a jail expansion in a few years, you're going to see another uptick before it again eventually starts to drop back down. But this is the goal that we have, is that you create a tax levy rate, and then you only see decreases from there. So you see a one-time increase as the new project's added on, and then you see a decrease based upon structure and because you're sharing it with more and more people every year as the county continues to grow. So overall with the debt, that's what we're looking at. All right, so when we look at major revenue sources, major expenses, if we compare this budget to last year's budget, it's up about $8.5 million. Now, one of the things I'm going to throw out right away is health insurance premiums. They're $1 million. They actually count twice because our health insurance is self-funded. So we collect premiums from all of the employees, from all of the departments, and we put that into the health insurance fund. So that's $1 million in expenses. And then the health insurance fund has that $1 million revenue. They pay the health insurance claims. So that's $1 million in expenses. So that $1 million actually gets counted twice. That's what happens with any internal service funds. So you deduct, technically you deduct $1 million from there. But as we look at what the revenues were and the expenses were, this is kind of how I got to a reconciled budget. So the referendum of $896,000 plus our net new construction minus personal property taxes being deducted was only about $1.2 million. I went up to 100% of the sales tax that was available. That was $935,000. Health insurance premiums, which is what all the departments pay, it's also on the expense side, came in, so that's covering that health insurance fund revenues. Sorry, I was going to sneeze there. Grants and state aids, about $400,000. We increased interest earnings by $250,000. Department of Corrections lease, that's half of a year lease for them. So they're going to be coming in July. So that's $100,000 of revenue. We increase some of the charges that we charge back to the healthcare campus based upon input from the committee of the whole meeting on that topic. So there's additional $100,000 of revenue. Reduction to UW Extension Services, that's $185,000 that we've saved there. Vehicle registration fee, that's all going into highway, but that's additional revenue that's new on the books. Transportation charge for services, again, it's a highway revenue, $675,000. And then healthcare campus charges for services. So this is made up really of two parts. One is the Medicaid reimbursement rates are up and the Kitty Roads wing being opened up. So you see a lot more additional revenues coming in for that. You had a question, Supervisor Osnes?
Yes. You want to talk a little bit about the reduction to UW Extension Services?
I think we'll come back to that in about 5 to 10 minutes, and I'll go over that probably in more detail there. Is that all right? All right. Okay, on the expense side then, so new positions. So the referendum was all 4 new positions, 7.5 positions, 896,000. The total of new positions in the budget is about 1.3 million, so about 400,000 additional above that. Wages and benefits, well, really the wage side of it with the non-health insurance benefits is $1.1 million. And that includes a step increase for all the employees. That includes a union contract settlement. Nope, that one's down below. This is the non-union employee wages, but it's the 1.1 million. Health insurance expenses of 1.1 million. That's a 10% increase to the health insurance. The union contract was 320,000 on top of those increases. Healthcare campus staffing. So the wage and benefit increases at the healthcare campus, this is the normal ones, but also additional for Kitty Roads of 1.5 million, which they have that 2.6 million of revenue to help cover that. Health and Human Services, purchase services, it's only up 250,000. This is one of the areas of the budget that I used to balance the budget. This really probably should have been $400,000 to $500,000 higher. Our experience rating would tell me that it should be higher. I just can't afford it. So we'll talk more about that also when we get to the Health and Human Services budget, but I shorted this line item from what it really probably should be in order to get us to a balanced budget, and I'll talk about what that impact is later. Other inflationary operating increases throughout the budget were 500,000. 150,000 is library levy. That's a pass-through as a special tax. Transportation projects, 1.1 million additional. And the highway's on a 2-year cycle, so you see them go up and down every other year. So that's a common occurrence. And then healthcare campus expenses, their other expenses of 1,150,000. And some of that includes monies that they're paying for debt service and monies that they're paying to the county for additional services now. All right, so a little bit more on those budgeted revenues. In the taxes, the 1.2 million, referendum, net new construction, other taxes, it's the vehicle registration fee, it's the sales tax. We see a decrease in intergovernmental charges. That's really ARPA funding, the federal government, that's now expiring off at the end of 2024. Charges for services, you can see the healthcare campus way up there as the leading contributor. Transportation charges, again, that's charges to the state and others. Miscellaneous, that's interest, that's the DOC rent. Our internal service funds, that's the health insurance. And then fund balance applied, healthcare campus. So when the healthcare campus is generating more revenues than expenses, you'll actually see a negative fund balance applied. So we'll get more into that also when we go over their budget. Revenue sources, this really stays pretty status quo from year to year. Property taxes are 1/3 of everything that we bring in. So I know that's what gets the most attention, but really taxes are only 1/3 of the whole picture. The other ones are coming from charges for services, transportation, sales tax, grants and aids. When you look at the revenue source, though, by individual departments, it can vary. Both HHS, is the model, though. They're evenly distributed between property taxes, state aids, charges for services. Highway's not too far off, where their property taxes are 38% and charges for services are 45%, a little lower on the aids. When you look at some of the public safety or general government, though, they're much heavier property tax driven. They don't have charges for services or some of the same grant opportunities, so they have a very small slice of that. So when you have increases in public protection, just know that it's coming from property taxes. That's what needs to pay for increases there, because that's the only revenue source they have coming in. All right, on to the expenses. So in general government, we saw an increase of 835,000. That's inflationary pressures, that's some of the new positions going in there. The internal service fund, they're up $1 million. That's mostly all the health insurance. You can see public safety, is up 1.3 million. That's mostly attributed to the sheriff. He's not sitting in the back row anymore, so I can get away with that. Health and Human Services, Healthcare Campus. That's the biggest contributor out of the Health and Human Services section of the budget that's increasing. And then in highway, those transportation projects on that 2-year cycle, again, are fluctuating. So our expense distribution, so where are we spending the money? So the big ones are Health and Human Services takes 30%, Public Safety is 14, Highway is 16. So really those 3 departments, that's over half of the budget right there. Everything else is less than half of that. Expenses by category, we're a service organization, so you can see that 45% of everything that we spend is in the salaries and benefits. So nearly half of everything we do is service related with people, and then we have supplies at 44, debt service, and some capital. All right, big picture of the budget. Now we'll get into some of the more detailed changes to it. So this first page represents 0.55 FTE. These are small changes that we've made really through the year. They go to the administration committee for reclassification request, and they get approved. It's usually, and sometimes has no net impact on the FTE, and sometimes it's a very small impact. Pretty small dollar amount on this page. These staffing changes then on this next page are the referendum positions, the 7.5 positions that were approved by referendum, and the other 6 positions then that were added. So all of these positions are in the recommended budget. So we have 2 positions at ADRC. They are 50% funded by state funds and 50% funded by tax levy. But with our aging population, this is a growing area, and so they've asked for additional support. In HHS, the Behavioral Health Division, we have 1 additional FTE that was added there, and that's going to be grant funded. That has no impact on the tax levy. It's purely grant funded. They don't get the grant, they don't get the position. Corporation Counsel has 1 legal assistant. They took over those CHIPS cases. They found out what the district attorney's been talking about for all these years about needing additional support staff. So they too have asked for 1, but Heather convinced me of it. So that one is in the budget. In human resources, we have a training and development specialist. I think this is a really important position for the county because we're going to be able to train our own leaders and continue internal promotions, developing our people and promoting them, and then hiring at the base level where we have more applicants. So I think it's a really important position. It also helps with liability exposure. The better trained your managers are, the less lawsuits we get into. And then the medical examiner. So currently our medical examiner is on a contract basis, and we're going to change that to an employee basis as our current medical examiner plans to retire in 2025. So those are the staffing changes. That has a large impact on the budget, so I wanted to make sure I went over those. We also eliminated some positions. So in HHS, Behavioral Health, there were 5 different case manager positions that were ARPA funded. Those positions were eliminated. Just so you know, 2 of those are the co-responders that were in the referendum approved. So technically it's 3, but I added them there, so I'm showing them as a subtraction here. In community development, we had a grant project technician position that was grant funded. That grant has finished, so we've eliminated that position. In facilities, we've eliminated a lead custodian position, and we've gone to contract services for that at a lower cost. And then in the Parks Department, we reduced a half FTE, really just based upon improved scheduling of the seasonal staff. They've been able to reduce their demand for the seasonal staff by a half FTE. So when it's all said and done, all of the changes, these last 3 pages, they come out to a net of 6.55. And considering the referendum approval was for 7.5, that's probably a win for the county there. All right, authorized FTEs, just looking back at the last decade's worth, we've gone from 560 to 665. A lot of that was the big jump of 30 back here between 2016 and 2017 is the nursing home being completed, all the additional staff for that. Otherwise, we've seen, anywhere from 0 to 3% increases on average and a 1% increase this year. As a growing county, you're going to see growing staffing. Okay, on the employee benefits. So the health insurance plan changes, we'd originally come in with a 23% estimate for renewal. So we went back, we looked at what we could make changes to get that down. We got that down to a 10% increase in premiums. We implemented an on-site, near-site clinic options, and we did increase out-of-pocket and deductibles and some of the co-pays in order to get down to the 10% increase. So this is a substantial increased cost shift to some of the employees. So just understand that that is in there, but that was necessary for us to do in order to come up with a balanced budget. On the dental insurance, we just had the administration committee approve a change there where we went from the county paying 25% to the county will pay 35%. There was an 8% increase in premiums. This really just absorbs all of that and then a little bit extra. So the employees will see a small decrease on their dental cost. The WRS contribution rate, these are set by the state. It's whatever the state says they are. We had a very small increase on the general employees, a larger increase on the protected group. Compensation that's built into this budget, there is a step increase for all of the non-union employees. Plus I have budgeted in here a 1% one-time bonus in lieu of a COLA. I really would have liked to have gotten a COLA in here to make it much more comparable with what the union's seen. I just really can't afford it. So the 1% bonus is being paid for with fund balance. It's about $300,000. Only employees that are eligible for it will receive it. And we're really kind of using it also as a retention tool. You'll all have to have been employed on January 1 and on October 1, and it'll be paid out then in October of 2025. So you got to stay pretty much the whole year in order to receive it. And then the union has a 3% COLA. I believe that's on the county board agenda for ratification later. All right, so when we add all of these numbers up, what does it mean to the taxpayers? Well, it means that our mill rate goes down again. So you can see from the last 50 years here that we're reaching below where we've ever been before as far as the mill rate. So the cost per value of property continues to decrease. It's a 4.86% decrease from last year. It's the 12th consecutive year now that we've had a decrease in the mill rate. Probably more importantly though than just us, what are we doing? How do we compare to our peers? So this is based upon 2022 data. So we've continued to improve, but we're the 8th lowest mill rate out of the 72 counties in Wisconsin. So St. Croix County is doing an exceptional job of keeping the mill rate low. We're $1.87 below the average. That's 38% below the average. And the one right below us is Chippewa, and I can pretty much guarantee we're going to pass them up. We'll drop to 7th next year. And again, this data is 2 years old, so I already know what our mill rate is. So when we compare it to the other data, we're going to continue to decrease there. When you look at it on a per capita basis, we're still pretty low. We're the 18th lowest out of the 72 counties. The average tax levy per person in St. Croix County is $391. The average in the state is $529. So we're 24% below the state average. And again, we continue to improve. So this will continue to go down. We dropped one spot from where we were last year. Last year, if you look at my presentation, we were 19th. Now we're down to 18th. So we're trending in the right direction. Tax bill impact. So remember, we had the voters approve $896,000 referendum. If they had not approved that, this would have been $896,000 lower yet. So it already is a decrease in the mill rate. You can see that the operating levy rate dropped 3%. The debt service levy rate has dropped almost 10%, and the special purpose levies were down about 1%. Dollar-wise, the total operating levy was up $1,390,000. The debt service was down, and the library levy, that's what's in that special purpose, was up slightly. So again, a decrease in the mill rate for our taxpayers. So any questions on that? I'm gonna go over, yep, sure. Supervisor Shirley?
On page 54, with the debt service levy, that is included, that's now including the reduction we talked about for the highway department building versus the other page earlier, correct?
Yep. So if you remember, I can flip back to it if you want, but if you remember, I said 10.7 million is the debt payment for 2025. You can see right in the middle of the screen there, 10.2 million is the amount we're levying for the payment. So the difference, the $500,000 difference, is coming from the healthcare campus to make that part of the payment. Yep. So that's why you're seeing a decrease, is because of that contribution. All right, so that's the big picture of the budget. Forecasting for 2026, this is all subject to change. Our tax levy rate is going to continue to decrease. We're not going to have another referendum, so I know there won't be that, so I can pretty much guarantee another decrease next year. It's really just the way the state is set up. It's the amount that you're allowed to levy divided by the value in the county is your mill rate. So if you said, well, the mill rate's down, we don't want it to be down, why don't you just raise that and then we can afford other things? I can't. There's no more levy that I can do. The state is limiting me by what we can do. So I cannot increase it. I mean, we are required by state law to decrease the levy rate this year based upon the numbers that we have in front of us. So that's not an option. Net new construction, I think it'll be up. I kind of watch the Register of Deeds, where their fees are. That gives us a little bit of an indicator of how things are moving. So I think it's going to start coming back up. Sales tax growth, since I maxed out this year, we're going to have a smaller increase next year. So it's going to be something less than 500,000. I say this every year. I tell the department heads no new positions. They still ask for them. I still give them some. But I hope every year for no new positions because they're expensive. It really makes it difficult to balance the budget and provide all the service demands that we have. Health insurance premium increases, I think will be something less than 5% next year. I'm really hopeful that the on-site clinic is able to help reduce our medical costs and steady that out. Step increase, if at all possible, and our debt service, I already know will be flat going into the next year because we have a plan for that. So that's what we're looking at for the presentation part. So, any questions on that? Otherwise, what we'll do, yep, Supervisor Long.
Where does the revenue sharing from the state, increase in revenue sharing come into play in these numbers? I'm sure it's hidden someplace, but.
Yep, you will. It's page 157 of your budget book. Yeah, so on page 157 of your budget book, the other state shared revenues are right here. So prior, we were receiving about 585,000. Then it jumped up to 1,332,000 for 2024, and it'll be 1,351,000 for 2025. So yeah, there was a big increase last year, one-time increase, inflation indexed after that. So that $20,000 isn't saving me. I mean, it's almost nothing out of a $130 million budget. The other thing that you're seeing here, I'll cover it since I'm right here on it, this change where we went from 140,000 to 422,000, this is personal property taxes. So the state eliminated personal property taxes, which is something that we collected. So you don't pay taxes on personal property anymore. So the state gave us $300,000 instead of the tax that we were collecting, because that's the portion that we would have collected last year. So that's the other reason you're seeing the total tax rate drop. It's less than what our net new construction and referendum added together. If you did the math on those, you'd say, well, it should be higher than that. Well, then deduct the 300,000 personal property. That's the number that we're left with. So it's just showing up in a different part of the budget. But that's where the numbers are that you asked about. Okay, we will jump, before I turn it over to Dustin for his section. I was asked to go over the end part. So starting on page 271 of your book, 274 of the packet. So these are the other organizations, basically, that we support and partner with. So the library levy, so we work in conjunction with the libraries by paying for rural circulation. We pay it 100%, which the libraries very much appreciate. And it's really just a mathematical formula. Their cost per book divided by the number of books the township residents check out, and voila, you have $1,869,000. You can look to see which libraries it's being distributed to, plus their hotspot funding. The rural libraries, very small amount of circulation, but an additional $70,000 that we pay to them. Then we get to the fairgrounds. The fairgrounds is at $80,000, as they've been at for a couple of years. We support the fair in its operations in order to continue that event. They've provided us with a copy of their budget and how they use those funds. UW Extension, I know this is the one that some of you have some questions on. So UW Extension, we contract with them for educator positions. In this budget, I've reduced the educator positions from the ones that we've had down to a single educator. It'd be the 4-H educator, an intern, and then some of their operating costs. So we were able to save $185,000 by reallocating funding from UW Extension to other parts of the budget. Do you have additional questions on that then, Supervisor Osnes?
Sorry.
There you go.
And with that, we're going to say 4-H. And if you don't mind, Carrie is here, an area extension director. Can we go over some of the different areas that are going to be eliminated, if you don't mind, so folks know? And some of the different things that they do and maybe the numbers that they're dealing with?
Sure.
I think it's a hot topic right now.
Thank you. Some of the positions that we're going to see reductions in includes our health and well-being educator. That is a co-funded position, so approximately about $47,000. She is a 1.0. We also have a community development educator, 0.5. Her work, that roughly comes out to about $23,000 as well in the co-funded compartment. We have 2 ag educators combined, that's a 0.5 position, so again, about $23,000. One being a more soil and crops sort of focus, the other being dairy. And then our support staff is also going to be eliminated. And so therefore, sort of the hub, if you will, for UW Extension services, both statewide, but also our local services. Essentially, we do provide services for families and youth in the form of resiliency, as far as mental health support, programming in that way with our health and well-being educator. Our community development educator does a lot of support, technical service, some of the leadership programming that you mentioned, that's some of her forte, things and efforts that she could have provided as well. And then obviously our ag folks in terms of crops and soils, they do a lot, she does a lot in terms of land quality, but also conservation. And our dairy expert is also sort of in the idea of support for your livestock and other dairy production here within the county as well. Questions, though, that I can help you with? I do know we also offered out a packet to the entire board, and so hopefully that outlined some efforts for you as well. That's more concrete than me just speaking off the cuff here today. Sorry about that. Additionally, I have presented to our committee once in June, but then with follow-up documentation as well that outlined our efforts and impact as well.
Carrie, can you talk a little bit about, are there any of the programs that Extension does, are they overlapping what community development does, or are they partnering it all together with anything?
To the best of my knowledge, there hadn't been a concrete ask. That had not been offered to me. There is synergy, definitely, between our crops and soil educator in particular with regard to the nitrates studies that are taking place here. That's a lot of what Becky does in her work in trying to impact those rates and trying to lower those rates within the county. Of course, through research, but also through programming and educational efforts primarily. The other one that really comes to my mind is, as mentioned and as in in the presentation here today, some efforts our community development educator Allison Sauter does, organizational and leadership development. And so if you were seeking leadership programming, there could have been some efforts that could have been provided there as well. And/or organizational, she does a lot of technical support in terms of strategic planning. I know that we had worked, alongside the board here as well at one point in time, and then helped to vet your last strategic planner as well. And then our health wellbeing educator, Selena Freimark, as mentioned, does a lot of work in wellness, community wellness, and has been a true asset in terms of mental health support, and again, in the form of resiliency. So there again is some synergy with your HHS.
And right now, we've got a great number. We've got, what, a little over 600 that are in our 4-H program right now?
Our program is coming up to a ceiling of about 800 total, and that's youth and volunteers. Yeah, I couldn't give you the exact number, but I know we are in the top 20 in the state as far as overall membership.
And that's one of those, and I don't know if any other supervisors are getting calls, but that's one that I get all the time too. Just, we thank the
do I.
county for making sure that we're gonna have a 4-H program right now with something else. But I want to thank you and our entire extension staff. You look across the street and hear what some of the other counties are doing, folks, and our extension in St. Croix County, your folks are the best of the best, and I can't thank them enough for all the great work that they have done. So thank you, and pass on to them all their good work. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Anything further that I can offer, or I do have my assistant dean here could also speak to? Yes.
Carrie, I'd appreciate learning a little bit more about, let's assume that we go forward with the budget as proposed. What will happen to, I see 3 bulleted items in this letter, nitrogen enhancement product research plots, the nitrogen sulfur rate effects on winter wheat yield research plots, and then nitrogen and phosphorus research data collection for water quality awareness and education. What will happen to those programs?
We do still have educators, or specialists that do statewide work, which there could be efforts that could come here as a result of that. However, you won't have those educators in the county to offer those support. The research work that has been taking place, that would continue no longer. And so the things that are specifically mentioned there, they would be eliminated from the county.
Okay, and also the question on this, strong bodies fitness for midlife and older adults. I've gotten some calls on that.
Excellent, I'm glad. That one is a little bit fuzzier in the fact that we have more of an area model, and so we do have volunteers that run that program. The issue would be with the liability, and so therefore, if you don't have an educator in place and if Extension's not the people or not the group that is actually overseeing that, then there would be, correct me if I'm wrong, but there would be no insurance as far as protecting those folks who are conducting those programs. So
Okay.
those programs too would be eliminated here in in St. Croix County, although volunteers could technically continue on, but they wouldn't be protected.
Okay, thank you.
Overall, Carrie, if the county decides that they're just gonna go with the 4-H group, where do our seniors, or not our seniors, but where do our citizens and their families go if they need help? And we've taken that expertise that you folks have given them, where do they go? As an alternative to what you guys provide.
I think in all fairness, I can't answer that I think it's more a matter of they would have to find out. What we do is we do provide upstream educational opportunities and research. We try to present data so that it's in an unbiased format and so forth. If folks needed to continue to, or would like to seek those out, I'm not certain where they would be offered.
And I don't know if their phone, or supervisors are getting phone calls from extension folks. I mean, but there's a real concern on that one. That if we disband that particular program, where are they gonna go? Where do they get the extra help? And every one of them said the same things. They can't thank enough of your great staff and the time that they've given a lot of folks to help them out and get them going in the right direction. And they're afraid of what's gonna happen if we disband this program altogether. So thank you again for the great work you guys do.
If there are no further questions, Supervisor Ramberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are these positions, their paycheck comes from the state of Wisconsin, and then this is just a program that the county assists in funding?
Technically, yes, we are staffed and by the University of Wisconsin-Madison. We are our own division within Madison, and so that's where we receive our benefits or paycheck. But yes, the county contributes to a co-funded rate.
Supervisor Leaf.
So I'm an ag kid, right? Raised on a farm, FFA kid, sorry, but I was 4-H advocate, always have been. I appreciate that some people may think that ag is shrinking. Maybe we don't have the need for some of these positions, and I would differ in that while I realize that the way farm visits with companies and it seems like every agricultural company wants to be your friend and your partner, right? But it's about the data and the being non-biased piece. But I will also say it's not just larger agricultural enterprises. I heard from people that run CSAs, and they're very concerned about losing extension positions because they're a go-to for them for help. And I think you're seeing more and more of the farm to table. Look at the farmers markets here in Hudson and River Falls and other places. So I would hate to lose this piece of our identity as St. Croix County because we still have agricultural roots, even though we are in a bigger city here. And but I do believe that this is a great service. And I think also just having that, without the extension piece, the 4-H piece is an island, and I don't think that that's good either. I've seen it firsthand, how great the 4-H programs are. I judge herdsmanship at the county fair, so I get to see all the little 4-Hers. And it really is a great program to build leaders in the industry, and while they might not be production ag people down the road, you could be tertiary, and everybody has to eat, so I think agriculture is such an important piece of our county, and I hate to see us to take away this funding when it's really, when you look at the overall budget, it's really a tiny piece.
I'd like to, can you hear me? This is a strange microphone to me. I'd like to maybe bring Ken back up and talk about some practical solutions to this, if possible. Ken, I'd open my comments talking about this from the perspective of the spectrum of people who want to retain extension. We've heard from the public, we've heard from the president of the Farm Bureau and the president of the Farmers Union, which is a really wide spectrum of constituents. We've heard from people who live in the city, and we've heard from people who live in the country. And without going into the programs and justifying things in minutia, I think what this spells out is that we have a wide constituency who want to see us keep extension. We also have quite a few concerns on the part of supervisors and staff that we don't have a good enough, strong enough relationship with extension, and perhaps we haven't seen a strong enough performance. And I use that word very cautiously. We don't see the kind of performance from extension that we'd like to see. And I don't mean any insult at all to extension, and I don't mean any insult to any supervisors who see this otherwise, but I think we need to improve our relationship and we need to see a better performance from Extension. But I'm going to suggest that we go ahead and adjust this budget. We have a 50.5% fund balance, and I'd like to suggest that we take money from the fund balance, keep the status quo, fund Extension for one more year with a caveat that we create either a permanent subcommittee of community development or we create another committee to give oversight to UW Extension, and that we do a needs assessment just about from the beginning of the year, and we do it independently of Extension to come up with how things are going to be assessed and what type of educators we might better use. And we work closely with the leadership at Extension, and we close that gap, we close that communication gap so that we don't get into a situation where we don't perceive a value for the services that they offer. I would ask supervisors to consider that, and I know that creates a structural deficit for the following year, that we work with you to close that in '26. So that's what I'm asking you, my colleagues, to consider, and you, our administrator, to help us accomplish.
I think we can make a better informed decision if we do that, instead of just saying, let's slash at 72%, and what are we slashing? We don't know for sure that if we need it or not. I like that idea.
Supervisor Ben Summerlin.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, here's one thing that only the people who are on the commitment to community group knows, and that is we have twice asked Ms. Weiss for information as to how many people, the number of people that participate in these programs. Twice over. We have not gotten an answer yet, and I would ask her again today, but I don't expect to get an answer. That's important if we're talking about bang for buck. If one person talks to us and says, I'm really going to miss this, that's one out of almost 100,000 people. Which way do we have to reassess this? How do we have to relook at this? Number two, so I received this, I see it kind of as a nasty gram from the assistant dean. And so he talks about the programs on the first page. You all have a copy of it. It's in the envelope in front of you. You all have a copy, and it says down there the programs that are subject to being eliminated. And so I looked through that, and I'll keep in mind that my background is working with farmers all of my life, all of my productive life. So I know a lot of farmers. So when I see farm programs, and I have not got the information as to how many of them participate, I call them. Okay, you have that sheet in front of you. Down toward the bottom, the ones that talk about farmers, nitrogen enhancement, product research plots, and all of that. So I called, do you participate in that? No, but if we would go to our agronomist, because our agronomist comes to us from between Hammond and Baldwin. He's there the next day, he takes the test, he shows what we're doing. I can have it almost immediately. That makes this bullet point not real relevant, because there are several agronomists in St. Croix County. Number two, right below that, nitrogen and sulfur rates effects on winter wheat's yield research plots. I ask you, how many of you people know how many acres of winter wheat are raised in St. Croix County? Do you know, Ms. Weiss? Well, I happened to do some research on that. And I found, by calling agronomists, they're the people who sell the seeds, I asked, how many bushel or how much seed do you sell? Well, he says, I sell about 30 bushel of seed, or I know a fellow who plants about 30 acres of winter wheat. He's my brother. And it's part of a nutritionist program for one certain level of calves that they raise. And that's supposed to do better. He says it's kind of a temporary thing. This was the first year he planted it. Not much results yet. I happen to have a friend who raises 10 acres of winter wheat. And he raises it because he sells that to one of the distilleries in Richmond. It could be the 45th parallel. I'm not sure how many there are, but he raised. So he sells it to them because then they can claim that they use local products. If you're keeping track, that's 40 acres. That's all that I can find that are planted in St. Croix County. Do we need a program? We don't know how many people participate. Do we need a program that talks about the effects of winter wheat on research plots? Well, somebody says to me when I'm talking about this, they plant it as a cover crop. Except winter wheat doesn't grow till spring, so if you plant it in the fall, it doesn't hold the soil in place like a cover crop is supposed to. So pretty much everyone uses ryegrass. So again, that's a program that doesn't really yield much for us. I mean, 40 acres of land, 10 acres is just so they can claim something, and 30 acres is for an experiment. And yet, that's one of the programs that is seen as important. Next bullet point, nitrogen and phosphorus research. Again, because I received a copy of this letter earlier, I talked to the agronomist, so what about this? Well, he says, that's not a big deal. We don't get any requests for that. We have nobody that asks about that at all. I asked, but the people who I talked to about growing winter wheat, so do you go to the extension to find out how to plant winter wheat? Here's what one of them said. Well, any idiot can do it. It's just like planting grass seed. You put it in the drill, you drive down the road, it grows. Do we need a program for that? Animal reproduction. I have 3 good friends who are, I'm going to call them factory farms. Those were the people that should be learning about this. I asked, do you participate in this? No, we've got our own people in staff that can tell us whatever we want. We don't go to someone in Madison and wait for the results to come back. So I think there's a reason that we haven't got numbers of participants in these programs. It's because there probably aren't very many. It's probably not very impressive. So maybe it's time that we take a year off from the extension and see how that works out. We can always come back. But why not wait and see how much we miss? I'm part of the land and water group, excuse me. And there are several of the things that are listed here about water quality, about wetland preservation, about land shaping that they provide, which overlap these considerably. Now, does Ms. Wise not know that those are there because she hasn't asked? But they are there. So I think it's time that we look at our spending. Again, we're up against a stone wall as far as our tax levy. I think most of us here think that the 4-H program is a very worthy program, and that we've kept that intact. But I think the other part of it, I think Administrator Witt is right on by offering to us that we can hold back $185,000 to see how things work.
At this point, I'd like to call Administrator Witt back to the podium, if you will. Supervisor Hanson made a suggestion. He didn't make it formal, but he suggested that money be taken from the unassigned fund balance to fund this for a year. Could you react to that? And then if there's no further discussion, we can make a more formal decision on how to proceed. For example, how did the administration committee, not the administration, the Community Development Committee, when they considered this, how did they vote on it?
Yeah, I don't know that the Community Development Committee voted on this particular item, but I think I got general support from that. They didn't ask for any changes to what the plan was. The request from Supervisor Hanson, what it would take is a motion to amend the proposal that I have in front of you. It would increase fund balance applied by $185,000, and it would restore $185,000, roughly anyways, to the UW Extension contract services. And so that would be the change. So what that does is the implications of that are, and Supervisor Hanson pointed out, it creates a structural deficit going into 2026. So you've created a hole, small hole, but it's a $185,000 hole in the 2026 budget. So you're either going to drop the services then, that was a one-year experiment, or two, you're going to not do something or cut something else then in order to continue that into 2026 and beyond.
I'm going to call on the chairman of the Community Development Committee, Supervisor Anderson, at this point for comment, and then we'll try to bring this to a head.
I do want to comment. Yeah, I agree with Supervisor Van Summerlin. We have asked for information or more hard data twice and have not seen results. A lot of the stuff that are highlighted in this letter, we just 2 weeks ago got in-depth reports from community development on a lot of the water quality stuff that they're doing themselves. So it seems like an overlap and one we're not really seeing much like different or additional results from. A lot of it seems repetitive, and the one thing, we had a lot of public comment at the meeting, I will say that, but most of it was talking about 4-H and how valuable 4-H is, which is obviously being, as it has been discussed, is being maintained. So I'm in favor of the reduction that has been proposed, and we did highlight it as a special item, and no one wanted to amend the budget to change this value when we discussed it at our last committee meeting.
Thank you. There seems to be two options. Supervisor Hanson has raised one of them. I'm seeing there are no other options. So the other option is to cut from something else. So unless somebody wants to, I'm going to call on you, to cut from something else, then I think we would go back to Supervisor Hanson. If he wanted to formalize his suggestion, we'll take that as a formal amendment. Supervisor Hanson.
Okay, I guess red means go. I'd like to see that through and I guess poll the supervisors and see how everybody feels. And then if it doesn't pass, I'd like to talk about the 4-H option and discuss features of that, because there's another caveat that goes along with that. But if you wouldn't mind, sir, we could actually see how everybody feels about funding all of it.
I'll defer to you if you'd like to have just an informal poll. That's fine with myself. Or Supervisor Bernie.
So I would ask that we also, along with proposing whether or not we want to fund this, what are those that are for keeping this, proposing that we cut out of the current budget to make it work. Because that's something we're going to task next year's county board. And I hate to do, we don't want to do that even to the next group that comes in after that. We're not going to do that to them next year. So I would ask, and I guess it'd be Supervisor Hanson, what do you propose that we take out of what's been proposed in this budget to replace that $185,000?
We have a 50.5% or 50.5% fund balance, which is a fund balance we have a minimum, fund balance of 35%. 50, it's a huge amount of money that we're holding of the taxpayers' money. Taxpayers who are asking to have extension as a service offered to them. What I'm asking for is to take that money and provide extension to them. That's what I'm asking for.
So
I'm not asking to take something away.
Right.
I'm asking to add something.
In that 50.5 though, we have a lot of that is designated towards, like, I think a lot of it's the construction project, because we got down to 38% in the last meeting, and then Administrator Witt and I worked on getting another 3% to help make the new highway building work. That's what that proposal was that he talked about earlier when we were talking about the general obligation bond. But we're still, if we do it that way, we're creating a structural deficit for next year. So that's why I'm asking, $185,000 is what we're looking at. What are you willing to put on the chopping block in the budget that's proposed to make that $185,000 work this year, not out of one-time money? That's what I'm asking. Otherwise, I can't vote for it. But I'd entertain if there's something you want to substitute for that.
Supervisor Witt, when we talked about this, it doesn't seem that we needed to take something out of this budget. We should be able to take this out of fund balance to pay for extension, wouldn't you think?
I think the only option we've got on the table, because nobody's offered anything else, is exactly what Supervisor Hanson has suggested. And I would just suggest at this point that we all understand that we'd be taking $185,000 from the unassigned fund balance to pay for 1 year, and that does create what the administrator said, a 1-year a structural deficit. So I would just suggest that Supervisor Hanson, if you'd like to offer a formal amendment, let's do it that way. We can get a second if there's a second and vote on it, and then we'll come back to you for the further discussion you want on the 4-H. So would you like to make that formal amendment?
I do. I move that we take $185,000 and out of the fund balance to keep the status quo and fund UW extension for 1 more year. And as a caveat to that, we create a oversight committee to expand the communication and control to create a better relationship with extension to solve some of the problems that we've had with them.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Supervisor Adams seconds. Is there any further discussion? Supervisor.
Ken, can you come back up? I know we've talked about fund balance in a lot of meetings. I know we're much less than 50%. Can you give us an actual number with the highway building where we're actually at?
So we started with the 50.2% fund balance. We reallocated $4 million to the capital improvement fund. We reallocated $1.5 million to the health insurance fund. And as we discussed a little while ago about the debt service, I suggested an additional $600,000 to reallocate for 2026 to help flatten off that debt service. So that would bring us down within the parameters then of our fund balance policy, which is 35% plus or minus 3%. So 185,000 would still keep you within that same parameter. And I just want to say, because the question was asked a couple of times ago, it's whatever you guys decide you want to do. You're the decision makers. It's up to you how you want to use the taxpayers' resources.
Is there any further discussion? I'm sorry, Chairman Long.
Very simply, creating a structural deficit is just a bad idea. We don't know what we're going to look like in another year. And all of a sudden we've got this deficit, particularly because we're funding a program that my understanding has been underperforming. So there's no reason that we can't come back and look at it again next year, but I'll say it again, it's very simple. Creating a structural deficit is just simply a bad idea.
Supervisor Hanson.
I think this is an important piece of information. I was told by Dean Carl Martin, who is the head of all of UW Extension Madison, that if we were to pull out of Extension, that the resources that are put into St. Croix County would then be allocated to other counties. That wasn't meant as a threat, it's just a matter of policy at Extension. So when we say, well, we're going to pull out for a year and then decide if we want to go back in, we won't have that option. So just keep that in mind, please.
So seeing no more discussion, I think we're prepared to vote on it. So an aye vote would be to support Supervisor Hanson's amendment to take $185,000 from the fund balance to support the extension program for another year. And he had some extra things I think are suggestive relative to an oversight committee to enhance communication. So with that, we'll cast the vote.
I didn't have the screen prepared, so I can't pull it up.
Yeah, and a yes vote is a vote in support of Supervisor Hanson's amendment to take the $185,000 from the fund balance to support the extension services for 1 more year.
Some votes are coming through. You have to be in the board portal still for it to pop up.
It doesn't just pop up, you can't pull it up, right?
If you stayed in the board portal, it should have popped up automatically. If you had exited the board. Yeah.
And I had to change my password. That's what I've got.
Sign in here with that new password, probably that you did.
The new password, I can see the old one popped up.
No, the one that you changed today. I think it seems like you changed it earlier. Do you want me to put yours in?
Yeah, you can. No.
I didn't have the screen pulled up, Christine, so I can't display the votes. You'll just have to call it.
I just need one more vote. Jerry Van Summeren.
Van Summeren,
Just need your vote in there.
you need to vote. Supervisor Van Summeren, you need to vote.
Yeah, and I got an incorrect in what I put in.
I was in the agenda packet. It's nice that I think
If you hit e-vote and it pops up for you,
Christine, did you change that where we can hit the e-vote button?
they changed it. They
Oh,
didn't.
thank you, they must have watched us all struggle.
I can't get into vote. I mean, she recorded my vote, but,
See on the bottom, 11,
Yep.
no, 8, yes.
okay, well, on that motion by Supervisor Hanson, there were 11 noes, 8 yeses. The motion fails. Supervisor Hanson, you had a further discussion and amendment you might care to offer?
Yes, sir. Thank you for letting me address this. That being the case, we're funding for 4-H, and the discussion becomes, should we allow for an administrative assistant with 4-H? And that requires about $70,000. At that point, we have two choices to fund an administrative assistant. I was told that we would have a very difficult time finding a 4-H educator who would be willing to come to St. Croix County if we didn't have an administrative assistant, which sounds, it sounds ominous, like we wouldn't have 4-H if we didn't get a 4-H educator, and we wouldn't get a 4-H educator if we didn't have an administrative assistant. So what I'm asking my colleagues to provide for is $70,000 to pay for an administrative assistant. How do we do that? We have these two choices. We could take $70,000 from the fund balance, which may be the very best option, because the other option would be to look at ADRC and to take one of the .5 FTE positions from ADRC and apply that to the 4-H program. And I think we should have a discussion about that, decide whether we want to provide for the administrative assistant in the 4-H program, which is really to provide for the 4-H program at all, because it sounds like UW Extension won't be able to provide an educator unless we provide a administrative assistant. And how do we want to pay for it? So I'm going to suggest that we take $70,000 from the fund balance to pay for an administrative assistant. So I think we should discuss that.
I'll take it that was in the form of an amendment, if you'd like,
All
and
right,
a motion, and we'll need a second for that.
I would like to make a motion that we take $70,000 from the fund balance to pay for an administrative assistant for the 4-H program.
Is there a second? Supervisor Leaf, seconds. Is there discussion? Supervisor Anderson?
I want to know how long this position has been vacant and how we did 4-H, how we've been doing 4-H if it has been vacant for a while.
Ms. Weiss, if you'd care to come up and address that, that's fine.
At current, we have an interim that is serving to support in a part-time capacity. We waited to post for the position because our prior educator left in July after the fair. So we waited to hear if this position was going to be supported before posting and going forward.
Is there any further discussion on Supervisor Hansen's motion? Supervisor Rice?
It's a question for how we operate the 4-H function. Are there other administrative assistants out of the same area that we could borrow from? So let's say 0.5 or 0.25. It does seem if we add a full-time administrative assistant, we're essentially adding 2 positions to 4-H.
Yeah, the request is really for 2 positions because 4-H is the only thing that's happening then. So prior to about 5 years ago, when we first added an administrative assistant to UW Extension, it was supported through administrative staff from community development. And that was really what my intention was, to provide some administrative support to the 4-H educator position. I mean, it's not going to be the same equivalency as a dedicated position would be, though, obviously.
Is there any further discussion? Supervisor Van Zerman?
Ken, would you repeat that? It's hard to hear in here. Would you please repeat that?
All right. I got a microphone. Yeah. So 5 years ago, the UW Extension is when we added the administrative position. So prior to that, the way that administrative support was provided to UW Extension was through our current county employees' administrative staff. And so they supported all of the educators. And so that would have been my intention of how we were going to continue to support the 4-H educator, is through going back to that model, using our administrative support staff for that. And again, though, I will say, though, it's not the same level of support as a dedicated individual.
But it did work back then, okay? 5 years ago, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. It worked to the point where we changed it, but yeah.
Supervisor Burning?
So we fund 4-H, but 4-H won't be implemented unless we do this other position? Is that what we were just told? And if we were just told that, where does that come from? Other than Supervisor Hansen? You know, like, I'm not trying to be any, I'm just wondering where this comes from.
Right.
That
So
we
what-
have to fund this, or else what we're funding won't be executed.
I'd be happy to cite my source. The assistant dean told me that at the WCA convention, that it will probably be hard to find a 4-H educator willing to come to a county that doesn't provide administrative support. And he's here. He could step up and own that if he wants to. But
Okay,
that's
I
what
mean, yeah, I'd like to know that, because then why are we funding it to an organization that won't execute it unless we then fund it? I mean, I just kind of, it sounds really weird. So if you could explain that, that'd be great.
And please identify yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jason Hausler, Assistant Dean, Extension. So there's an operative word that Supervisor Hansen's talking about. It's attracting talent. The 4-H program, as you know, is robust. It's 600 members, 200 volunteers. And I think you've gotten some correspondence from 4-H leaders about the capacity it truly takes. It's one educator. So when we talk about the administrative component of a 4-H program that large, it takes support. And so it's not about, we won't deliver the program. We will. I mean, that's what you're choosing to do. The 4-H program does require a 4-H educator from USDA NIFA to be in custodial care of that program as a requirement. So we will deliver upon that. It's to the point about attracting that talent. So we have internally a metric that we try to, when we look at program size and scope of what the appropriate level of support staff would take for a program this size. And between online management of enrollments and risk reporting, of making sure that all the 4-H leaders have background checks, helping the volunteers and the staff member with program planning in terms of getting in the communication out to the members, getting contracts done, those sort of things. We would recommend a 1.0 FTE support staff for a program this large. And I would say that that is maintaining and growing. Without support staff, we run the risk of capacity to maintain the program as it is, to support the volunteers at the level that we currently do. And so the concern is that we erode program integrity and quality over time. And so that's the piece. So I just want to clarify, it's not a have to, it's a, if you want to maintain what you have, our recommendation, because of the 72 different programs that we see around the state with 4-H county programs, that would be ideal. And as Administrator Witt mentioned, we've operated with less. It's not ideal. And the point that I think Supervisor Hansen's trying to make is attracting talent in a very competitive marketplace right now. And that's the point I was trying to convey in a conversation with him at WCA.
Okay, so then I have a follow-up for Administrator Witt. Are we, and then maybe you could also answer this as well, because it's going to be a twofold question. Are we able to provide adequate support to maintain the quality of our current 4-H program if we choose to go down this path?
I don't know. I mean, we're going to try. I
Okay.
mean, we have multiple staff within community development that would be able to assist, and maybe it'll be a team effort. That would be the goal that we do.
Okay.
But until you try something, you just don't know, though. So I
And we
can't-
can always we can always come back midstream like we do every meeting in some capacity with some department and go, oh, this isn't working right, we need to adjust this.
Yep.
So, I
Life's
mean,
about
as long
constant
as long as you're willing to give it a go, like, we can always come back to this midstream, I think, and make the adjustment as we need to. So, I'll leave it at that with my thoughts.
Is there anybody else seeking recognition? Supervisor Van Summeren.
Yeah, I'm a bit troubled that UW Extension hires good help, mediocre help, no help at all. I mean, you're talking about if we're going to attract the best. Does that mean you also have the worst? Or how do you hire that? How do you fill that position of administrator?
Are you looking for me to answer?
He-
Are you referring to the, excuse me, Supervisor Summerlin, are you talking about the educator?
You're talking about the the educator.
Yeah.
We would attract the best educator if we have a full-time administrator, and we would attract the less than best educator if we had a less than, if we didn't have an administrator. So does the university system hire good help and poor help? Or how am I to understand that? Thank you.
No, I think what we have seen, so, no, we recruit equitably across, we want the best talent. I think what we have seen is attrition from our staff across the state. Actually, I just heard about a resignation of a 4-H member, or 4-H staff member in a different county with a program this size that lasted 5 months. And the feedback through exit reports, through the Human Resources Office has said, this is untenable. One person without appropriate support staff is not able to maintain and grow a program this size. So the point that I was in a conversation with Supervisor Hansen was my concern in a competitive marketplace is those that come to Extension, generally speaking, have an understanding and a background of Extension services, have been a 4-H member, 4-H leader, those sort of things. And we have gotten questions from candidates like, so what level of support do I have in this office to do these programs or to assist the 4-H educator if I come into this? And in some cases, we're saying we don't have enough, and we've lost some talent because of that. When we've also retained talent because of it too. So, I mean, it's both sides, right? So to your question, no, we're not saying we're changing our recruitment process. The concern is that if we want to maintain and grow the 4-H program, stability is key. And we have seen a robust turnover, especially in the 4-H program, when there's a lack of adequate support staff. Because of the administrative, we're protecting youth, like it's their future. And so, you know, we and again, I'm not getting into the weeds on program, but you're going to screen the volunteers. You're going to go through background checks. It takes administrative support to operate a program this size. Again, can we make it do to Administrator Witt's point of like, we're going to try it? We will work with St. Croix County to deliver the program to the best of our ability with the resources that we have. And I think vocalizing our concern about the capacity of that level of service, I think is where Supervisor Hansen's point of making sure that we're staffing up to maintain what we have. Because my concern is that if we don't, we may see an erosion of that, and we may see a turnover in our educator. We just saw a turnover, and that's.
Thank you, Mr. Howes. I think you've been very thoughtful. That was a good explanation, and we appreciate it. Thank you. Is there any further comment? Seeing none, I think we're prepared to vote on the amendment offered by, did I see Supervisor Anderson?
On that resignation, if you don't mind, how much, if any, support did they have from county staff, or was it none? Because I think we're offering some support from staff at the county level, which maybe that individual didn't have it, and that kind of maybe was the breaking point. The resignation that was just referenced from a similar size 4-H program.
Right. So I think the question is, did we have county support when she was in place, correct?
No, the other county.
Oh, that's a you.
That's a Jason.
Supervisor Anderson, I think the one that I referenced that just left, they did not have adequate county support staff, and whether that is, we have a model you can contract with extension for support staff, which you currently do or have currently in St. Clair County on the contract for administrative support, or it's through a county department, and that one they cited in. We had as a leadership team got an exit report breakdown of the recent resignations and retirees, and that was one that was cited as they don't have enough support staff. It wasn't a full-time position, and so minimal investment in that area led to concerns about integrity and thriving program that way.
Any other supervisors seeking recognition? If not, I think we're prepared to vote. If I can summarize it, Supervisor Hansen, you are offering an amendment that would take $70,000 from the fund balance to support an administrative staff assistant to the 4-H educator. Is that correct? So an aye vote supports that, and no vote opposes it. And we're prepared to vote. On that vote, there were 6 ayes and 13 noes. The amendment failed. With that, thank you for the folks who came from the audience to speak to the issue. Very thoughtful amendments were offered. I think I also heard that there was some support that Administrator Witt offered and the chair of the Community Development Committee, that if we did need some additional support, we'd work very hard with the educator to try to provide that so that we had a robust program going forward. So with that, is there any further discussion of the issues we just went to? And if not, we'll turn to item 5. And Mr. Hawkins, I believe, am I correct on that?
Yeah,
Or-
actually, just going to finish up a couple
but-
pages here, and then
Okay,
we'll
why
go.
don't we finish up those 2 things, and then I just note the time is about 4:30, and we don't want to rush through the rest of them, but as I've pointed out before to the administrator, if we could hit the highlights that are really important to us and not the small figures, because we know that there are 1 or 2 things that have driven all the increases. And so as we get to the other 25 issues we have to get through tonight, if we could hit the highlights, I think everybody would appreciate that. Administrator Witt.
All right. So the other section of this budget, economic development, no change to that, $115,500. The last 2 pieces in this section then was the KIP, which has a resolution adopted by the county board addressing that, unless you amend it later. And then the debt schedule, where you can see the $500,000 of fund balance applied coming from the healthcare campus. All right. So with that, then I will turn it over to the finance director, and he is going to go through the public protection agendas, or the public protection cost centers. So starting on page 59 of your budget book, 62 in the digital packet.
All
right, thank you, and you guys won't have to tell me to talk less. I'll get through as quick as I can here. So in circuit courts, one of the big things you'll notice from our 2024 budget to 25 is the other federal payment. That's our ARPA grant for CASA. That is no longer, so you'll see that drop off the revenue and the operating income lines. So otherwise, there's not really much of a change. Property taxes went up about $50,000, but that really is tied to net wages and fringes. Any questions in circuit court? So again, you see the big drop in operating income or operating expense, but again, that's related to the grant for CASA right here. As we move on to clerk of courts, you will see a big increase in our general property taxes. We went from $943,000 to $1.17 million. Again, the big change here is in our wages and fringes. We have one new position, which was in the referendum. That's for deputy clerk of court. And we did have a slight increase in our operating expenses as well, about $71,000. The big change there is the court-appointed counsel went up about $55,000. And that's just because there's a higher demand and their costs are increasing as well, just like everybody else. As we move on to the medical examiner.
If I could interject just very quickly for the information of the board. At the next PPJ meeting, we are going to be having Chief Judge Needham and the Clerk of Court specifically talking about court funding issues. And there was a major presentation on this at the Wisconsin Counties Association meeting 2 weeks ago. And there are numerous suggestions that came forward as to how the county might get more money retained here as opposed to sending it down to Madison. And we're going to explore those with Judge Needham and the Clerk of Court and see if we can't come back at some point in the near future with a resolution to the board if we concur on some approach that would retain more money for us so that this isn't quite as expensive as it's just been pointed out. So you were about to turn to the medical examiner.
Yes. Yep, in the medical examiner's office, as Ken said before, the big change next year is a full-time medical examiner will be on board. So that's going to see an increase in our net wage and fringes because they will have benefits as well. So you see an increase in our general property taxes of $88,000, and their net wage and fringes went up about $101,000. So then our operating costs went down just slightly, just kind of do some cleaning up accounts that we did as we went through the budget. But the big change is just because the medical examiner position is being added in this department. As we move on to justice services. So our property taxes went up about $200,000. We also lost some ARPA funding on the other federal payments, so we no longer have that available for next year. And again, similar to other departments, the big change is into the net wage and fringes. That went up about $179,000, so that kind of ties into the increase in property taxes. And that is due to the drug tester was an ARPA funded position, and now they're staying on, so we're absorbing that as a county cost, so that's why our general property taxes are increasing there. If you scroll down to the operating expenses, those are pretty much in line with what they were before. We just kind of did a bunch of cleanup between accounts, but no large net changes. The district attorney's office, this was another department that had a referendum approved position. They had a 0.5 FTE investigator. So our property taxes went up about $138,000 from last year. And that's again tied right in net wage and fringes, which went up about $124,000. You'll also notice in the general government grants, it went down about $41,000. That was due to our VOCA. We are not getting the VOCA grant next year. And our operating expenses are pretty much in line with what they were last year. Questions? In the child support department, there is a negative property tax balance in here, and that's because all of their funding is from grant revenue. Really, there's not a lot of changes between year to year in the budget for 24 to 25. If there's anything you have questions on, let me know. Again, our operating expenses, 113 last year and 119 this year, so just slight increase. So in the sheriff's department for law enforcement, here again, we have a large increase in the general property taxes. It went up about $525,000. That's due to our wages went up about wage of fringes went up about $560,000, and that's due to an ARPA funded, or sorry, not ARPA, a referendum position for a new investigator, as well as the union agreement, which will be voted on later tonight. You'll see that increase. And then also our WRS is slightly higher increase for the union, the law enforcement than our general government employees. In the revenue, you'll notice the law enforcement fees are going up from $100,000 to $210,000. That's a combination of the Star Prairie agreement, as well as they are increasing their process fees. I think it's on a future public protection agenda item later this week. And their operating expenses also went up about $90,000. Some of the big changes are due to transports. This other professional services from 209 to 226. And then just the additional users they're going to have for software subscriptions, and then the higher costs that they're getting expensed. This went from about $300,000 to $326,000. Similar in the corrections department, they had two corrections deputy positions in the referendum. So that increased our wage and fringes about $560,000. And our general property taxes due to that went up about $600,000, so you can kind of see the correlation there. And their big expenses in the operating income or operating expense, they went from 1.1 million to 1.15 million. And that's kind of due to an increase in their medical contract as well as their meals contract. So really things that are kind of out of their control. In emergency management, property taxes only went up about $29,000 year over year. We did lose, sorry, we shouldn't say we lost a grant, but it went down $41,000. That's due to the hazard mitigation grants. So we did that last year. I think it's on a 5-year rotation. So you'll see the expense drop off as well, and this $31,000 was that. So it's kind of cross it, lose one, but lose the other. So it didn't really have any net effect. So once you take out that $31,000 from the operating, we're really in line with where we were last year. Emergency communications, our general property taxes went up about $131,000 from year over year. And that's really, again, driven by just the wage, net wage and fringes went up about $96,000. And that's just due to the step increases for the employees. Operating expenses only went up about $18,000, so it's a very small increase. And then I will turn it back over to Ken unless anybody has any questions on any of these. All right, thank you.
Dustin and I look good in our suits, huh? Sort of like Men in Black, except for not cool.
And I was just going to add, thank you, Mr. Hawkins, for that presentation. I think that was his first full one before the board on this, and he did a great job.
Yep, he did. All right, so I'm going to start with Corporation Counsel. I'm only going to, if there's a significant change in there, I'll highlight that. Otherwise, I'm just going to say there's not a lot to see there. It's just the routine items. So in the Corporation Counsel, though, there is one change to note, and that's the new position. So we do have a new legal assistant position being added to help with the CHIPS cases. And then we also are seeing about a $5,000 or $3,000 increase in software and subscriptions in their operating expenses. In the county administrator's budget, you're going to see a decrease there. And that's not because I'm doing such a great job with the budgeting. It's just because there's a single line item. It was $50,000 for program development that we had budgeted for 2024 that we didn't end up using. So we're not going to continue that into the future years. So you actually see a decrease in the overall budget for this department. Also, under the county administrators tab, then you're going to see the insurance funds that we have. So we have the self-insurance fund, which is our health insurance and dental insurance. So you're seeing the 10% increase in health insurance there. That's been absorbed throughout the budget. Within the retirement health savings, this is worth noting. So I'm not levying any general property taxes into the retirement health savings. This is where employees that are eligible for long-term sick bank payouts, that's where this comes out of this fund. So I'm not levying any dollars into that. We had been experiencing, $500,000, $600,000, $800,000 yearly payouts. Last year was $186,000. Year to date, we're at $33,000. I think a lot of the large payouts have left. We've changed the policy. Nobody else is coming in. And I think people are using the hours now more too, now that they know that it could be taken away. So I don't think they're putting as many hours into it. So the fund balance within the RHS fund is about $2.2 million. So what my plan is to use fund balance to drain that all the way down before we reconsider whether we need to levy any dollars in this. I think that'll last for at least 5 to 7 years, potentially longer. And as we have less and less employees that are eligible for that payout, that may be sufficient. I don't know, but we'll reevaluate it as time goes on. But that's $300,000 that I was able to reuse elsewhere in the budget. So that's important that I paused on this one. The risk and property, this is where all of our liability and property insurance comes from. There's represented about a 3% increase in the insurance. Workman's compensation, again, we're self-funded for workers' compensation, and we're running about the same. It's the increase you see there is really just wage and number of employees growth as they pay more into it. The premium rates that we charge ourselves remain the same. All right, moving on to the county clerk then. So in the county clerk proper, you're not going to see much for changes. The next one is the county boards, committees and commissions. You're not going to see much for changes. The county clerk dog fund, no changes at all. Elections, so you saw this drop quite a bit. It's the election cycle. So number of elections. So even years we end up with 4, odd number of years we end up with 2. So just different number of elections, we budget different amounts. So you see that go up and down. All right. So human resources. So in human resources, you're seeing an increase in the wages and benefits, and this is attributed to that additional position that we've put into the human resources department. This is a training position, and as I kind of mentioned before, I really see some benefits for adding this position. That's why I recommended it in the budget, but that's the main change that you see there. When we get to the IT department, you're going to see that their tax levy actually decreased. The reason for that decrease, their expenses are still up, but the reason for the decrease is we have $103,800 in general government support of county departments. That's the charge back to the healthcare campus. So as we reviewed it at committee of the whole, and you guys kind of questioned me on that, we went back, we looked at it, and you know what? We weren't charging them for their software licenses, their Microsoft licenses. So if we don't get a choice in paying it, well, they don't get a choice now either. So they're going to pay those licenses directly. So that's Microsoft, that's Oracle, any of the licenses where we have a user charge directly tied to it, we can tie that directly back to them. We'll have them pay that. You know, in the past, they probably never did. I'll get to you just a second. They probably never did charge them for that because they didn't have any money. So if you don't have any money, it's really no sense charging them. You're just going to end up paying yourself anyways. So really, why bother? But now that they're having this new revenue source with the higher Medicaid, they can afford it. I think it's a great time to reevaluate and start charging them for those things. Supervisor Rice?
Could you tell me which line item that those licenses are, those software?
The expense side or the revenue side?
Well, I think it's on the expense side, isn't it?
Yep.
The
So the
chargeback.
revenue side for the IT department is the 103,800 that I highlighted on your screen. So the expense side for software subscriptions and licenses is this $818,000 on page 150 of the book. Yep.
I want to make
Supervisor
sure I
Rice?
understand this. So in the past, the county was absorbing close to $800,000 for software subscriptions?
So we do pay $800,000 a year for licensing for Microsoft, Oracle, some of the other softwares. We're absorbing the healthcare campuses portion of those, which is about $100,000.
Okay, I got it.
Yep. All righty. Moving on then. Do you have a
Mr.
question,
Witt, maybe
Supervisor Barkalow?
could I-
No? It's like an auction. You itch your head, and, I'm going to think you're,
Mr. Witt, if I could interrupt for 1 second.
Yeah.
I just want to get a sense of the group. In a few minutes, we'll have been going for about 2 hours, but we're moving pretty rapidly now. And so I was just going to suggest that people can leave the room at any time to go to the restrooms. But if we wanted to continue on, if we thought we could wrap things up in about 30 minutes or so,
Oh, yeah.
and anybody can ask any questions they like, then I would just suggest we continue and then take a break after that before the formal board meeting. Is that satisfactory to folks generally? Okay, Mr. Witt.
yeah, I think we're at about 15 minutes out. I think we'll get through this. So we'll be starting the county board just a little bit late, but I think we'll get through pretty quickly here. Finance department, there's nothing additional within the finance department. On that default, we talked about this page a little bit before. This is where the shared revenues and stuff comes in. The one line item I didn't maybe point out, though, was the sales tax. So the sales tax is at $12,537,000. That was the exact number that they estimated for us. So I went up to 100% of the estimated sales tax. So we talked about increasing that and going higher, really because of the $1 million increase in health insurance. I increased sales tax by $1 million. That's how I balanced those two items. So really, this was a very tough budget, and we're talking about lots of changes. I mean, there's only 1 or 2 per department, but they're everywhere. They're spread out throughout the budget. There's a lot going on here. It was a complex budget in order to get us to a balanced budget, but a lot of it does happen right on this page. All right, the county treasurer. There's nothing much going on here. A couple of her fees are actually down. So like the tax deed expenses was down a little bit. The software subscriptions was down as they've implemented their new software. They had a 1-year charge in there. And then banking fees, I think, was also down. In the facilities department, we're actually seeing just a small decrease. They eliminated the one position, the custodial position. They went to contract services, so we were able to actually save some money there. So that helped with the reduction. We do have cost for heating, cooling, water bills, electricity that are higher than they've been in the past. I did knock it down from what our facilities director asked for. I thought maybe he just overestimated. I want to actually see the bills before I go that high. Considering how tight of a budget we have, I don't want to overestimate on these. So if I underestimated, we'll be over and I'll have to increase them then next time. But the building should be so energy efficient, we shouldn't see the big increases. Fleet vehicles, that's just a pass-through for the operating costs of the fleet vehicles. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Dustin for the highway department.
All right, so for highway, we didn't have a large increase in general property taxes. That was due to the vehicle registration fee that doubled. So we doubled our budget for the year. So it went from 875 to 1.75 million on this second line here. And so that's why there really wasn't any other changes. That's why you don't see the general property taxes increase. So that just sort of paid for our wage and fringe increase, which was roughly $500,000. And then some of the just higher costs that highway is experiencing. One of them was in roadway supplies. That's up about $121,000, and then rents and leases is up about $300,000. So those are the big highlights of highway. Also in here is the 5-year improvement plan. So 2024 is in yellow, and then the next 4 years are planned out on here as well. I'm sure some of you've run into this Highway A problem, but just remember the roundabout's not Robbie's fault. All right, I'll turn it back over to Ken for HHS.
See, I didn't even tell him he had to have jokes. He's just learning on the fly. Yeah. All right. So for Health and Human Services, we have 9 different divisions. We do summarize them all, starting on page 193 of the budget book, 196 of the packet. So I can talk about them as a summary, and if you really want me to delve into each of the individual divisions, I can. But I think we can probably summarize the changes really in just a couple of points. So general property taxes for Health and Human Services is up $1.5 million. So they're our largest department. They have a very large increase. So what is contributing to that $1.5 million increase? We do see some decreasing revenues. We see decreasing federal payments. Those are the ARPA dollars. Even some of the other payments are sort of drying up. They were getting a lot of COVID-related money that you're not seeing anymore. So those are going away, which contributes to the increase. We're adding basically 6 positions. 3 of them were referendum approved. So in Children's Services, we have the Youth Justice position. We have the 2 co-responders in Behavioral Health. We have then, those are the referendum approved ones. In ADRC, we have 2 positions that are being added. They're 50% tax levy funded, 50% state funded, and that's to help address the growing population we have that are using those services. And then the last one was a behavioral health case manager, and that's a grant-funded position. So we get the grant, we get the position. They don't get the grant, they won't add the position. So those are some of the wage and benefit costs that are increasing. The other increase then that you see on the next page here, and it's purchase services. So purchase services, if you look at this line item coming all the way across. So in 2022, we spent $6.4 million. In 2023, we spent $8.7 million, a $2.3 million increase. We were budgeted for 2024 at $6.5 million, kind of what the prior year had been. And I've put as much money as I can into it. They had asked for 7.3. I'm giving them about 6.8. I'm not able to get to $8 million. There's just no way I can. I really think that their actual number next year is still going to be in the $7 million range. We're probably shorting them by $400,000 to $500,000. Purchase services make up a lot of different things in different departments. The largest one, though, is in Children's Services, out-of-home child placements. So you've heard me talking about this. I've been on the soapbox about it, but it's a handful of different placements, and they range from, normally like $200,000, $250,000, up to one that we have that's $480,000 a year. So that $480,000 a year one ends in 2 years. So when that one ends, hopefully that's the anomaly. We don't have other ones that are that high. So the amount that we would be spending in 2027 would drop back to within our budgeted range. So I know we're going to run over budget for the next 2 years. They have about $3 million in fund balance. I'm going to burn through $1 million of that fund balance over the next 2 years with the hope that that's the anomaly and we drop back. So that's my plan. That's not a great plan, but that's the only one I have because I can't create $500,000 of additional money somewhere else. So I just wanted to be perfectly clear about what I'm doing there. All right. With no objections, that is Health and Human Services. We'll then move to the healthcare campus, 225 of your budget book, 228 of the packet. So again, the healthcare campus summarizes up the three divisions, which I think is fine to look at, especially for the healthcare campus. So they have a large increase in revenues, so budgeted revenues. So I really want to see proof that they hit these revenue numbers. I want to see proof that they open kiddie roads. I want to see that they do maintain these Medicaid rates. So I've taken a little bit of a cautious approach, but based upon their budgeted amounts, the revenues we have against the increasing expenses for additional staffing to open up kiddie roads, and after the $500,000 going to the debt service fund, after the additional $130,000 extra that we're charging them internally for departments, they're still projected to make about a $1.2 million net profit within the healthcare campus. So that'd be great if they actually hit it. I'm taking a little bit more cautious of approach and saying, prove it to me. But if they do hit these numbers, I think we'll be able to do a lot with the 2026 budget, having them contribute even more yet to other expenses or even more to the debt service. So keep that in mind, but that's what we're looking at for the 2025 budget. Any questions on the healthcare campus? All right, veteran services, they're very small. There's nothing changing there. Phil Landgraf does a great job keeping within his budget. And there we go. And I will turn it back now to Dustin. He will finish up the last section of community development.
All right, Register of Deeds. The only real change is in the fees that they collect. She estimated another $50,000, just kind of based on the last couple of years and what she expects next year. Otherwise, no changes on the expense sides. And the other community development departments, you might notice a couple of different departments where you kind of see some negative changes in the fringe and labor, and then a positive in a different one. We did a little bit of more cleanup this year. Jason kind of found some employees that should have been coded elsewhere. So that's just kind of what that is. But starting with the parks, as Ken mentioned earlier, there's a 0.5 FTE reduction there just for a little better scheduling for the seasonal labors. Otherwise, there's really no changes to the property taxes or operating expenses. For the resource, land, and water conservation, here's where we had a position that was grant funded that is no longer in 2025. So you'll see the decrease in net wage and fringe there. And then that also decreased our general property taxes. We did have an increase to our operating expenses. That was mostly due to this land conservation cost sharing. Jason must just be projecting more for next year. Our planning and land records, there's no property taxes in this department. It's all covered by the fees that they collect. There really isn't any major changes in revenue or expenses on this one. I guess the one to point out would be the mapping services. They were going to do some aerial mapping. That was an additional $25,000 next year. In zoning, so here's kind of where that cleanup was. So net wage and fringes in this department went up a bit, but that was more so because we corrected the costing of some employees to this department instead. Otherwise, as far as operating expenses, they're pretty in line with last year. Recycling, this is 100% grant funded. We received the grant for the year, and then any leftovers get distributed to the local municipalities. And again, there's really no changes from 2024 to 2025 expected. And very similar in hazardous waste. Pretty much the exact same as the year before. And that wraps it up.
Great. Thank you, Dustin. So that concludes the presentation of the budget. So if you have any further questions, we flew through that pretty fast. Is it on? Yeah. All right. I just got to lean in a little more, huh? All right. So we flew through the budget pretty fast. So hopefully you jotted down notes. If you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them. Otherwise, a lot of staff effort went into providing you with the balanced budget. So it's a sound document.
Could you share with us what the future schedule would be then as we conclude the budget over the next few weeks and into November?
Yep, so the budget, as it comes out of the committee of the whole, will be sent to the administration committee. They will take up a resolution to recommend the budget and recommend a tax levy rate, which is spelled out in the budget. That then goes before the county board, which we've moved to Wednesday, November 6th. At 5 p.m., we will hold a public hearing, and then after the public hearing, you'll be able to vote on the resolution adopting the budget and setting the tax levy rate. We're almost there.
Thank you, Mr. Witt, and Mr. Hawkins for excellent presentations and all the staff work that went into that. And also thanks to Ms. Weiss and Mr. Hauser for your comments from the floor. They were very thoughtful, and we appreciate that. And thanks to all the supervisors for a very good discussion on the two issues we discussed earlier with regard to the extension. With that, we're done with the business portion of the agenda. Are there requests for future agenda items? Seeing none, any announcements? Seeing none. Date of our next meeting will be to be determined, but it'll probably be next spring sometime as we get back into the budget preliminary work. With that, we're adjourned. Thank you.